So you've gone to do your tax return, dreaming of getting that new TV or increasing your house deposit, but instead you've walked away with barely $1 or maybe even owe tax. This is a common thing that's occurring, and you've either experienced it yourself, maybe you've spoke to a coworker about it, or you've seen a TikTok about it. I'm here to explain today, from a tax agent's point of view that's working with hundreds of clients on their tax returns, why this is happening and whether there's anything you can do to help. So first we need to look at, well, what is actually a tax return and what causes a tax refund? So when you submit your tax return, you're calculating your taxable income, which is going to be your income less your deductions. This will then work out what the tax is on that. We're then going to look at how much tax has been withheld, whether that's via your employment, maybe you've been paying installments or you've had some franking credits. And this will then work out tax owing, tax withheld, and is there a refund or a payment due. So at a basic level, to get a larger refund, you need to have more tax withheld than what you actually meant to pay. The larger that gap is, the bigger the refund. The opposite is obviously true for a payment. If you don't have enough tax withheld, you're going to owe tax, and the bigger that gap is, the more you will owe. But you are probably asking yourself, well, I got big refunds in the last few years. Why is my refund so significantly different this year? My circumstances haven't changed. I'm still working the same job. My deductions are similar. What has happened? Well, the big change is the LMITO, the low and middle income tax offset. This has been scrapped starting from 1st of July 2022. So this is the first full financial year where we don't have this in place. Now, this was a tax offset. Now, tax offsets are great because they reduce how much tax you need to pay. They're way better than a deduction because a tax offset, in essence, reduces you by 100% of whatever the offset is, versus a tax refund where you're only going to save at your marginal tax rate. So what was this offset? Well, as you can see, it was quite a generous offset because for anyone that was earning between $48,000 and $90,000, they were getting $1,500. Now, the average person is probably earning in that range. So a lot of people were getting this $1,500 offset. This is now completely removed. So overall, we are paying more tax under the new rules for 2023 compared to 2022. Now, in general though, your tax withheld should readjust based on the new rules because the tax tables get updated each year based on the correct tax withholding. But what has happened in prior years, on budget night, which typically is in May, they increased the LMITO. So the year was almost done and everyone had tax withheld based on these rules, then they increased the offset. So everyone got additional amounts back because there was a change to the tax rates, in essence, overall, later in the year, and your withholding was based on the old rates. So what has happened over the last few years is that your refunds have been inflated because of this offset. So what is happening now is refunds are returning to what they typically used to be. So for the average worker that works a job, they only have maybe $1,000 of deductions. They're earning around that $60,000 mark. They have nothing else that's going to impact their return. They're not going to have a huge refund because, for instance, their deductions are going to make approximately a $345 difference once we factor in the tax rate of 32.5 cents plus the 2% Medicare levy. If they've got nothing else going on, their work should be withholding almost the perfect amount of tax each week. Now, this can differ for people if your earnings vary dramatically week to week. Maybe you're doing some extra overtime and therefore your withholding is going to be based on a higher income for that week. But in general, tax refunds aren't meant to be thousands upon thousands of dollars. This means you've overpaid tax and therefore you haven't had access to that money ongoing. Now, what are some of the other factors that could be affecting your tax return? Well, maybe your situation has dramatically changed. If your income is going to vary greatly, maybe one year earned $40,000, next year it's $140,000, well, you're going to pay a lot more tax. But while I'm talking about a lot more tax, don't get caught up in how much tax you paid, because how much you paid is irrelevant without knowing how much you earn. I am seeing a lot of people say, well, I paid $20,000 and I only got $2 back. Well, you could pay $20,000 and get $2,000 back. Someone else may pay $20,000 and still owe tax. How much tax you've paid is irrelevant without knowing how much you earned. Your situation could have also changed when it comes to HECS or help loans. Maybe you've taken on some study costs and now you've got to pay additional payments for that. If you haven't got the right box ticked on your tax file number declaration, this can impact you. Now, this can go both ways. Maybe you've now got a HECS debt and you didn't tick that box, so your withholding hasn't been enough, and then as your income's increased, you end up with a shortfall. It can go the other way. Maybe your HECS debt is now paid off, lucky you, and you haven't changed that with payroll. Now you've dramatically overpaid tax, so therefore you get a large tax refund. Another thing that could have changed from you from year for year is maybe now you're eligible to pay the Medicare levy surcharge because your income has increased. As a single, you have a $90,000 income cap for the 22-23 year before you have to pay the Medicare levy surcharge. This then starts at 1% of your taxable income. So let's use the example of someone that's earning $100,000. They don't have hospital private health cover, and they get charged the Medicare levy surcharge of 1%. So now they've got $1,000 of additional tax payable. Now, if your withholding only gave you a small buffer room, maybe you're going to get a $500 refund. Now that $500 refund has turned into a $500 payment. So this is something to consider. I've got a full video talking about the private health tax implications, so go and check that one out. The other thing that could have changed for you is your deductions could have changed. If one year you're claiming $1,000 worth of deductions and the next year you've got none, this will impact your tax return. If your situation changes, it is going to likely impact your whole tax situation, which then obviously can lead into impacting what kind of refund you get. Maybe you've worked multiple jobs this year, and across the jobs you've accidentally claimed the tax-free threshold from multiple, and therefore your tax withholding has been shortfall. Maybe you've got government payments such as job seeker for a portion of the year, which is a taxable payment, but you didn't have any tax withheld, and when that income is added onto your employment income, you've suddenly got a shortfall because you've earned income that was taxable with no tax withholding, and therefore that has chewed up the excess you had from your job and pushed you into a negative where you now owe tax. There's a range of different reasons why you potentially could owe tax this year or have a different refund, but a lot of it will come down to that LMITO being scrapped. So don't necessarily stress. It doesn't necessarily mean you've done anything wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean your accountant's done anything wrong. What you need to focus on though, have you claimed all your deductions? Have you maximized what you can claim legitimately? One key thing I'm seeing people promoting on social media is just go and claim more stuff. You can't do that if you haven't spent the money. You need to understand what are you claiming, because the ATO are going to be hot on this year, knowing that people are trying to inflate their refunds because they've been reduced. So make sure you're only claiming what you're entitled to claim. Now, if you want to know what you're entitled to claim, I have a whole playlist here, which is tax tips for individuals, which dives into a range of different topics that I'm sure will help you make sure that you are maximizing your deductions and therefore maximizing your tax return.